Hey there, and welcome back to the course. In project number 3, we're going to build a user's CRUD API using API Gateway, AWS Lambda, and DynamoDB. The concept is straightforward. Our users will interact with an HTTP API, which will trigger Cloud Functions to handle the request, communicate with the database, and send back the response. By the end of this project, you'll have a fully deployed API with dynamic routes, database integration, and proper handling for create, read, update, and delete operations. In order to make this project more interesting, we'll also see how to connect to our backend API from the frontend. So I already prepared the frontend application. You'll just need to provide your backend API URL. And once you spin up the front-end application, you'll be able to create the user like this, edit the user. Let me change it around. Let's say that this is going to be John. Save changes, and you'll be also able to delete the user. So essentially, we'll be able to test our backend logic from the front end. Also, the application has the option to export this as CSV as well as the JSON. Also, towards the end of the project, I'll show you how to deploy the front end application and how to restrict access on the backend. So only the application that you have deployed have access to your backend API. And now that we know what we're going to be building, let's get started. Okay, and once we have the idea what we're going to be working on, the start is going to be exactly the same. We're going to create a new folder, come up with the name. I think in my case, I'm going to go with users API, like this. We want to open this up in a text editor. We want to create a new CDK application. Let me just zoom out a little bit. And in order to do that, we're going to go with npx CDK init. Then we're going to pick this option. And we'll go with good old TypeScript. Like this. Okay, this is going to set up the CDK project. Meanwhile, I'll quickly hop over to main course repo, and same deal. I want to access the README, and I just want to copy and paste and set it up in my project. So that way, if I need to reference something, I don't need to look too far. Yep, it looks like my application is in place. Again, we already covered these commands, so I don't think we have a use for them. And now let me look for project number 3. Project 3. Yep, that's the one. And we're going to start by installing quite a few libraries. And I'm going to cover them while the install is taking place. So grab this command, open up the integrated terminal, paste it. And essentially, we want to grab the faker.js. And I want to use this library because I don't want to come up with the values for the username and email. So I'll simply use this library. Obviously, normally you will wait for that data from the front end, from the request, but I wanted to skip this part. I don't want to keep creating John Does and everything. UUID creates the unique ID. And this is one of the interesting things that we do need to provide this for the DynamoDB instances that we're going to be creating, and that's why we need this UUID. It also needs the types since we're using TypeScript. Then types AWS Lambda. Remember, we need this one since we want to access some types. And then we have client DynamoDB. Just like we had with the secrets manager, this one is SDK. So this one happens where we set up the Lambda logic, the actual functionality. And we also want to grab this lib one, which is just going to make our lives easier. All right, it looks like install was successful, so we can continue. And up next, I do want to set up the Lambda. However, in this case, I'll show you the alternative approach where we're going to set up one Lambda. Inside of that Lambda, we'll have functions that will be invoked for specific paths. And when it comes to API, we'll use only that one Lambda instead of setting up, let's say, 5 of them. The big picture, we're going to have the API, the user's API, with following routes. So we're going to have a get route to /users. There's also going to be a post route, which is going to create the user. It's going to go to the same URL, /users. And then we're going to have 3 paths to update the user, to delete the user, and also to take a look at single user. And that path is going to be /users and then / and then the user ID. So we're going to start here by creating a new folder, and I'm going to call this source, just like I always do. And then inside of the source, we want to go with Lambda, but this needs to be a folder. What am I doing? Lambda here. And then inside of the Lambda, we're going to go with handler TS. And we want to start by importing the API Gateway Proxy Event version 2, as well as the result. But you know what? Let me try to use Visual Studio Code Auto Import. So first, we're going to start by export const handler. So this one will be async. And it's going to have the same event since we'll attach it to API Gateway. And when it comes to the event type, we want to go with API Gateway, then proxy event version 2, like this. Yep, we imported, and then when it comes to return, it's async, so it will return a promise, but inside of it, we'll have API Gateway Proxy. Nope, that's not the one. We want to look for result, like this. So this one didn't get the import. That's fine. We'll just set it up over here. Then we want to start working on the logic. And like I said, instead of 5 different lambdas, we'll have one lambda that will have functions. Simply to show you that it is definitely an alternative that you might see in production. For starters, we do need, in this case, method and the path. So the HTTP method, as well as the path. Since this lambda is going to be invoked with multiple methods and multiple paths. And this one will be located in event, then request context, HTTP, and then the method. And if you want to double check this, I already showed you multiple places where we can do that. And the second thing is going to be the path. And that one will be equal to event.request context.http. And now we're looking for the path. Then we're going to set up the try catch like this. And inside of the try block, we're going to write the if statement. We'll say if path is equal to, and I already know that the route is going to be users. Then we'll go with /users. If that is the case, then inside of this if block, I actually want to set up the switch statement, which is going to check for the method. And then if the case is going to be get, now I know that the user wants to see all of the users, and therefore we're going to invoke get all users, and it's going to look for the same event that we're having over here. Now we don't have the function, obviously. That's why we have the error. And you know what? Maybe let's set up those functions. That way we won't have to deal with these TypeScript complaints. So let me go outside of the function here and set up all of the functions we're going to use. In this case, I'm just going to show you that we don't need to use the arrow functions each and every time. We can also go with a sync function. The name will be here, get all users. And when it comes to params, the specific one is going to look for event. So we're going to go with event and then same deal, API. And you know what? The name is quite long, so I'll just copy and paste. So API gateway proxy event. Then let's do the same thing. And with the following ones, we'll obviously copy and paste. So it should be faster over here. Let's just say that this is going to be what we're returning. And for now, let's simply go with return and then the status code. And we'll set it equal to 200. And since we're going to test whether our functionality works, as far as the initial structure, we're going to send back the message that says, hey, we're fetching all users or we're creating user and that sort of thing. So JSON, then stringify, then we want to go with message. And this one will be equal to fetch all users like this. And now we want to create 4 more. So this one was get all users. Then we want to create user. It's still going to look for event. It's still going to return this. And when it comes to logic, normally you will get these values from the request. But again, since I wanted to skip some work, we will use the faker library inside of the create user to basically generate them for us. And therefore in here for now, we won't have any logic. We're just going to say 201, and then the message is going to be different. We're going to go with create user. Then we want to set up get user. So let's copy and paste. Not all users. Actually, in this case, we're looking for specific user. And that's why instead of the event, we're going to provide here user ID. And I'll show you where we're going to get one. So user ID equals the string, promise the same. And instead of the fetch all users, now we're saying fetch single user. Same deal. We want to copy and paste. Now we want to update the user. Now for the update, it's going to look for 2 things, not only the user ID, but also it will need that event. So here's where we want to combine this, copy, and then user ID. This one will be for update user. Still 200, just need to change the text. Let's say update user. And then the last one is going to be delete. And normally you wouldn't send back the message, but just so we can see in our request file that everything is correct, I will do that. What am I talking about? Well, first we're going to go with delete user. It's not going to look for event in this case. So only the update user, since in there we'll have the values that are actually going to be changed in that particular user. In here, we just want to go with user ID, status code the same. And when it comes to message, I do want to send back delete user. And you know what? Actually, let's make this dynamic. Let's say user deleted, and then we'll pass in the user ID, just so we can see that everything worked for sure. So user deleted or removed. This is totally up to you. And then let's access the user ID. I think this is the approach that I'm going to use. I have all of the functions. So now we can again continue with our main one with our handler, where we still need to set up some logic. So we have right now path users. Okay. Then we have case get. So this one gets all of the users. And what's missing right now is the post one. So now I want to copy and paste. The method will be post. And instead of get all users, we're going to go with create. Let's go with create user. We still pass in the event, and we need to come up with some default, simply because we need to cover the cases if, let's say, the path is correct, but the method is incorrect. And in order to do that, we just go here with default. And this one will be equal to return. And let's just structure status code 400 like this. And then body will be equal to JSON stringify. So JSON stringify, and then we'll pass in the message. And the message is going to be unsupported HTTP method for user's path. So this should cover /users path. Now let's set up another if statement, which essentially is going to deal with /users and then / and then the ID. So in this case, we want to go with if. We want to go with path dot starts with, and we're checking for users over here, / like this. And the placement here is important. Please keep in mind that we'll always start with / users, and only then we'll start checking for those IDs. And in here, we want to grab the user ID. And when it comes to request, it's going to be located where? Well, it's going to be located after the /, correct? And in order to access that, we're going to go with path.split. Then we want to grab users, but we need to be careful. Here, /users, /, and then we want to grab the second thing in that particular array, which will be that user ID. And since I don't want to set it up in each and every function, I'll actually check it here. If the user ID for some reason is not present over there, then let's return 400. So say status code, and we'll go with 400. And the second thing is going to be the body. And in this case, we'll go with JSON stringify. We'll pass in the object message, and user ID is required. Like this. Let's save it. Let's keep moving. And same deal, we do want to set up the switch statement inside of this if statement for each and every method. So we want to go with switch method, just like we had before. Let's set up the proper syntax. We want to go with case.get. Well, if it's the case, then we'll go with return get user, and we'll pass in the user ID. If we have the put one, guess what? Now we want to pass in two things: the event that we're getting back on the top, and also the user ID, but the function needs to be different. So this one should be update user, and also we need to change this one to put. And lastly, we have the delete one, correct? So let's change this. Let's say delete, then the method should be delete. And the delete user is not looking for the event, it just needs a user ID. And just like the previous switch statement, we also want to come up with the default one. So right after delete, let's pass in the default. It's going to be 400, and then we'll say unsupported HTTP method for user operations. So not / users, but the user operations. And after both if statements, we also want to come up with 404. So let's say that there is some kind of route that doesn't match any of the URLs. We simply want to go with return, then status code, and we'll provide over here 404. And we want to send back the body. JSON stringify message, and in this case, we'll say not found. And then at the very end, we have the catch one, where we want to also send back the response. In this case, it's going to be 500. So if there's some kind of request that basically fails, it's going to be 500 over here. We will log the error for our own sanity. So we'll say console error is equal to error, colon, and then let's pass in the actual error. And when it comes to JSON stringify, well, in here, let's just say internal server error. So this is going to be our Lambda, which based on the URL, so the path and the method, is going to invoke some other functions. And our next task is going to be setting up the CDK logic. All right, so now let's navigate to our stack, which is going to be under lib users API stack. Let me just move this boilerplate code. We do need to import quite a few things, but since we already have done that quite a few times during the course, I think I'm going to speed this up and I'm just gonna grab everything from the README since I don't want to type this from the scratch. We have CDK1, we have Node.js function. Since we'll create the Lambda, we have the runtime, we have the construct, we have the path, the API gateway, as well as the gateway integrations. We're going to start by creating the user handler. That will be our Lambda. It's going to be a new Node.js function. We'll pass in this. Let's call this user or users handler. Then let's provide options. We'll start with runtime. This one will be equal to runtime.nodejs22. Entry. Well, let's construct it path.join. __ their name. And more specifically, we want to look for the source, Lambda, and handler TS. Obviously, if your folder and file structure is different, please use your setup. Then we're going to call this handler, since I believe that's how I called my function. And lastly, we want to come up with function name. Same deal. I'm going to utilize the stack name, this dot, and then stack name, not stack ID, sorry, stack name, hyphen, and we're looking for user. This should do it for Lambda. As you can see, pretty much the setup we already familiar with, but when it comes to API gateway, yes, there's going to be more logic since we have one Lambda that effectively serves all of the routes. And the way it's going to look like, we're going to go with HTTP API. That's the instance. API gateway, in this case, HTTP API one. And we'll pass in this. Let's call this user API. For some reason, it feels like users would be a better name. Let's go with handler in this case. And also let's change it around. So in the README, I have user, but I believe this is a better name. So users API. And we want to come up with the name. Let's call this users API. Then we're going to go with comma. Description. Same deal. Let's call users management API. Comma. And then we want to set up the course right away. Since most likely I'll set up the front-end application. I don't promise, but that's the idea at least. Let's set up all origins. Then we're going to go with allow methods. And we want to set up API gateway course one. And we'll go with any methods, and then allow headers as well. Allow headers, and we'll set up the star over here. Okay, good. Then let's keep on moving. We want to set up the routes. So instead of setting up 5 instances, we'll create actually the array with our routes, where we'll have the URL, the path, as well as the name, and then we'll iterate over them. And then for each instance, we're going to create that HTTP API add routes functionality. Let's start here by setting up const routes. First object will have the path here, path property, and this one will be equal to users. Then method. In here, let's go with API gateway dot HTTP method. And we're going to go with get in this case. When it comes to name, well, let's go with get all users. And now let's copy and paste like this. So let's add a comma here and then 1, 2, 3, 4 more. So then we'll have 5 total. Second one will be post. Then the method or the name, I guess, is going to be create user, not users, but user. Then the path here. And when it comes to URL parameter, the way we set it up, we go with // and then the curlies. And in this case, I'm going to go with ID. Then the method will be again get. However, we're not getting all users. We're just getting single user. And now let me attach this to rest of them. 1, 2. So that's the syntax if you have the URL parameter. Second one will have method put. And the third one will have method delete. Now we just want to change around. And we'll say update user, and then last one will be delete user. Delete user. Like this. And after the routes, like I said, we want to iterate over. So for each, remember each and every instance has these 3 things, correct? By the way, in here, I need to provide the callback function. That's the proper syntax. And let's access path, then method, as well as the name. And in here, let's go with HTTP API, add routes. And let's just access these dynamic values. So we want to go with path. So path is equal to path. Methods is going to be equal to that specific method. Like this. And last one will be the integration. And in this case, the integration is going to be the same. We're just going to change that logical ID. So integration is equal to new API gateway integrations dot HTTP Lambda 1. And then the first one will make dynamic. We'll say that we'll access the name. That's why we were setting up those names in here. And let's go with hyphen. You know what? Let's skip the hyphen. Let's just go with name integration and then comma user handler. So provide that one Lambda function. And at the very end, we want to print out the URL. So same deal, new CDK dot output, CFN output. And let's provide this. Let's provide HTTP API URL, comma, and now let's go with value and description. So value will be equal to HTTP API URL, or is going to be empty string, and then description one is going to be HTTP API URL, And you know what? Let's change things around. Let's just say, yeah, we know for sure that it's going to be there. Same deal, we want to go with npx CDK deploy. Since it's not our first rodeo, we already know what is going to happen. At some point, we'll probably need to say yes right now. You know what? Let's go to README and let's right away take a look how we can set up those requests. So in order to save a little bit of time, I basically provided all of the requests, since it's not our first rodeo, like I said before. So let's go here. And we want to create a new file, make requests, HTTP. Let's paste it. Remember, we'll need to use our own URL, which eventually is going to be here. For now, the stack, I believe, is still being created. So let me just wait. And once the stack is going to be in place, we'll have the URL and we'll be able to right away test it. Remember, for now, we'll simply get back those strings, whether that is fetch all users, create user, fetch single user, and the rest of them. And please make sure that you get the correct responses, because otherwise, whatever functionality we'll set up with DynamoDB is not going to make any sense. So we definitely need to have the structure in place first, and only then we'll be able to set up our DynamoDB table. And then every time we make a request, we'll communicate with DynamoDB. It looks like I was successful, and we can definitely check out the AWS console, and we'll do that in a second. For now, let me just copy this URL, set it up over here. Now I want to get all users. If everything is correct, I'm going to get back that string, fetch all users. Okay, great. Then we're going to create the user. Okay, awesome. Then we want to get the specific user. Yep, fetch single user. then update user, and then we want to delete user deleted, and the ID. Okay, looks like that part is correct. Now let me navigate to the AWS cloud. Let's start with formation, I guess. We're gonna have over here our users API stack. We'll have the events over here. We'll have the resources. We'll have also the outputs. Okay, good. And I think we can skip the Lambda one. Let's just go to API gateway. We have our users API. In this case, we have the route of /users, then post and get, and then we have the specific one. So users /ID. And here we have delete, get, and put. And when it comes to integrations, notice we have Lambda for it. And also, let's take a look at the stages. This should be our default one. And now, of course, we can grab the URL. And if you have the same result, we could move on to the next step, which is going to be incorporating the DynamoDB database. In order to store our data, we're going to use DynamoDB, which is a fully managed NoSQL database service that lets you store and retrieve data at any scale without managing servers. You can think of it as a simple, fast, and flexible database that works really well with serverless applications. It's perfect for storing user profiles, form data, transactions, or any type of structured JSON-like data. DynamoDB is schemaless, which means you don't need to define the table structures or columns ahead of time. You just create a table, define a primary key, and start writing items. Under the hood, DynamoDB is highly scalable. It can handle thousands of requests per second, and it automatically scales up or down based on the traffic. No need to provision or manage hardware. It also integrates really well with services like AWS Lambda and API Gateway, which makes it a natural fit for event-driven or serverless architectures. Now let's quickly talk about cost. We have two billing options. On demand mode, where you pay only for what you use. And this is great for apps with unpredictable or spiky traffic. Pricing is about $1.25 per million writes and 25 cents per million reads. And we also have provision mode, where you define read and write capacity up front, and it's more cost efficient if you have consistent traffic. There's also a generous free tier. You get 25 gigabytes of storage and up to 200 million requests per month for free, which is great for development and small projects. All right, and up next, I want to add DynamoDB to our project. Just like with the secrets manager, I do want to create another stack, and I want to pass the info from one stack into another stack. So I'm going to go to lib, and I'm going to create DynamoDB stack, maybe with a hyphen, like this. And we want to import here the CDK, also the DynamoDB, and we want to set up that class. I guess let's start with the class. In my case, I'm going to call this DynamoDB stack. It's going to extend CDK and stack one, but we probably need to import this. So let's go with import everything as CDK from, and then remember AWS CDK lib. And let's copy and paste and change this around. In this case, I'm going to call this DynamoDB from, and then we need to go with /AWS and then hyphen DynamoDB like this. We have two imports. We have the class in place, and I will set up the property here. This is going to be public. It's going to be read-only, and I'm going to call this users table. So this is where I'm going to store DynamoDB table value, and this one will be equal to DynamoDB and table. Essentially, I'm setting up the type over here. Then we want to go with constructor. Same deal. It's going to accept the scope, which is going to be CDK dot and app. Then we'll pass in the string. This will be the ID, and props, which are going to be optional. And this is equal to CDK dot and stack props, like this. And then inside of the constructor, we want to go super scope ID props. Let's pass all three things. And now we want to go with this dot users table, and we'll set it equal to new DynamoDB table. That's the syntax. We'll pass in this again. We are just pointing to our stack. We need to come up with logical ID. And in this case, it's going to be users table. And after that, we want to provide some options here. Let's start with the partition key, which essentially sets the primary key. We have multiple options, but I'm going to go with, in my opinion, the most straightforward one, which is going to be using ID. And then the attribute type is going to be a string. So essentially, this is how we're going to look for our instances in the table. Like I said, there's multiple approaches. Let's start with this one. So name ID. In the instance, there's going to be ID, which we're going to use as our primary key. And then we'll define a type. And that one will be equal to DynamoDB attribute type. And we'll set it equal to string. Then we also want to set up the billing mode. And I'm going to go with pay per request. Again, we have quite generous free tier. So I think we should be good. So billing mode. And then let's go with pay per request. Remove policy, same deal. You're not going to do that in production, but in here, I want to destroy it. Once I'm done, removal policy like this. And then we go with destroy. And lastly, let's come up with the table name. In my case, I'm going to go with stack first. So let's access that. This dot, and then stack name. Then hyphen, and let's call this users table. Like this. After that, we want to navigate to bin. I will clean it up again. Let me just remove all of the comments. We want to import the DynamoDB stack. Import DynamoDB stack somewhere here. This is coming from, and as you can see, I messed it up. The name should be DynamoDB. And I forgot to add B. My bad. DynamoDB. Yep, we want to fix the import. And again, the placement is important. We want to start with DynamoDB stack since we'll pass it into our users API stack. So const DynamoDB stack like this is equal to new DynamoDB stack. Let's pass in app. Let's come up with a name. In my case, I'm going to call this DynamoDB stack. Then we want to set up the instance for our users API stack as well. So users API stack like this. And we want to pass in our DynamoDB stack. And the last thing we want to do in this file is to set up a dependency. So add here, add dependency, and provide the value of DynamoDB stack. Yes, TypeScript is going to complain since at the moment it's not aware of this particular prop. So let's navigate to users API. We want to grab the DynamoDB stack again, since we'll set this as a type. DynamoDB stack somewhere here. And in this case, I'm going to show you alternative approach. Basically, we can set up the interface, for example. I'll call this users API stack props. And this is going to extend the CDK props, stack props, more precisely. And inside of it, let's go with DynamoDB stack. And this one will have a type of DynamoDB stack. And now where we have the props, again, they're not going to be optional anymore. And instead of CDK stack props, we're going to pass in users API stack props like this. And we're almost done. But before we can start setting up the logic in handler, first we want to provide the environment variable. So in the Lambda, we can access the correct table. And also we need to grant permissions to our Lambda to read and write in the table. How's that going to look like? Well, first we need to find our Lambda. In this case, it should be somewhat straightforward since we only have one. And again, we have multiple ways how we can set up the environment variable. In this case, I'll use the approach of adding the environment property. Let's come up with a name. In my case, I'm going to go with table name, and this one will be equal to props. Now I want to access my DynamoDB stack. And remember, we did set up the table, the property table, and we want to access it. And also we want to grab the table name. And once we have this in place, now let's add the permissions. So we'll go here with props dot, then DynamoDB stack, then users table. And it has the method of grant read write data. And we want to provide here the value of user handler. And once we have all of this in place, now let's go to the terminal and let's invoke npx CDK deploy. And if everything is correct, I will hit the error because remember now we have multiple stacks. And I also forgot to save the file anyway. So let's just start one more time, npx CDK deploy. And remember it was --all. If everything is correct, if I don't have any errors, I'll see you in the next video where we'll start adding logic into the handler. I don't think I'm going to navigate to AWS and showcase the DynamoDB table simply because I want to add the values there first. Otherwise, we'll just be looking at the blank table. So if everything's correct, I'll see you in the next video where we'll start adding the logic. Okay, it looks like everything went smoothly. I didn't have any issues, which is always a good start. And it should be the same thing for you. So now when you navigate to AWS, search for DynamoDB service, and more specifically, search for tables. You should have the table in place. But again, you won't have any items. So in order to continue, we need to set up some items. And in order to do that, we need to add some logic to our handler, because at the moment we're just returning dummy responses. This is going to be the case where I suggest grabbing some code from README. Either look for the course repository, or if you already copied, just look for README. And more specifically, you're looking for this handler, yes, right after the stack, and just import these lines of code, since I don't want to retype them from the scratch. As a side note, there's also a tiny bug, but we're going to fix that in a second. So grab these lines of code, then navigate to the handler, copy everything. And the bug that I was mentioning is this. Instead of proxy result, it should be proxy result version 2. This is for the HTTP API version 2. In our case, it's not going to make much difference, but let's stay consistent. So here's what I want to do. I want to select all of them, and we're just going to basically provide the version 2. So let's type API, gateway, proxy, result, version 2. So this is the response type for version 2. Then we have DynamoDB client, which is going to establish connection. And also we have lib-dynamodb, which is going to provide some helper methods that we're going to use in order to create the item in a table, update the item, get all items, and stuff like that. Also, what's interesting, whenever we work with DynamoDB, we do need to generate our own unique ID. And that's why we're going to use this UUID library, which is going to generate that for us. And also, since I'm lazy and I don't want to provide unique values whenever I'm creating a new user, I'm also using this faker library, which we're going to implement whenever we create a new item. Obviously, it's totally optional. I believe whenever we'll connect it to the front end, I'll actually remove that code. We create the client. This is equal to our instance. We need to provide this instance into DynamoDB document client, and we'll get the instance which we're going to use in order to work with our table. And also, since we'll every time need to provide that table name value, I'm going to access the process.env table name. That's our environment variable. And I'm just going to set it equal here to this constant. Remember, we have the handler, which accesses the method and the path. And then we have a logic if it's /users, then we either get all users or create a user. And if it's users / and then the ID, we do some different logic. Get the user, update the user, and delete the user. And actually, in my case, I think I'm going to start with create user, simply because, in my opinion, it only makes sense to fetch all users if we already have some users in place. Now, when it comes to create user, the values are going to be located in the event.body. And in order to access them, we want to go here with const name, then email, and this is going to be equal to JSON parse, and we want to provide event.body. And I'm just going to tell TypeScript that for sure those values are going to be there. Obviously, we can make the fallback as well. And yes, normally you would add more checks. Let's say if one of the values is missing, then we send back, let's say, 400 response. But I don't want to really get into this right now. In my opinion, let's start by looking at the happy path scenario where everything we do, essentially, we're successful. And then later on, we can take a look at some error scenarios as well. And in order to create a new user, we want to go here with await, then DynamoDB. The command we're looking for is send. And inside of the send, we want to go with new put command. And inside of the put command, we want to provide the table name, which is going to be equal to our constant, of course. And then for the item, we want to provide the item property, and this is going to be equal to a user, which I haven't set up yet. In order to construct a user, first I'm going to show you how you would do that using the request values, and then I'm going to implement the faker logic as well. For starters, we need that user ID, and this is going to be equal to that UUID version 4. So this is going to generate that unique value for the user ID. And then inside of the user, we want to go with user ID and then two values. First one is going to be name. At the moment, I'm setting it equal to whatever I have in the request. And the second one is going to be an email. And also at the very end, let's set up created at property created at, and this one will be equal to new date and then to ISO string like this. Let's invoke this. And I'm going to comment out these two things since I'm going to use it later whenever we connect to the front end. For now, I want to show you how we're going to create those users on the fly using the faker library, simply because I don't want to provide those name and email values from my request. I want to generate them on the fly. And in order to do that, we go with faker.person.fullname, for example. And then for the email, we'll do the same thing. Faker.internet and email. So this is just going to generate those dummy values. And when it comes to response, we want to go with JSON stringify. And instead of the message, we're going to send back the user. Now we can definitely place it here in the curlies, but since I have a front end which expects certain syntax when it makes the request, if you want the front end to work, please follow the syntax I'm showing you. So instead of the object, we're going to go here with the user. So we make the request, whether that is from the front end or from our extension, and we should get back the user. I don't think I'm going to test it. I think I actually want to set up all of the logic for getting all users, getting single user and all that. And then we're going to test it. Since the logic is actually a few lines of code when it comes to get all users. So in here we have the event, same deal. We want to construct the result. That one will be equal to await DynamoDB, then send. And then inside of the send, we want to go new scan command. In here, we want to provide the table name, and we'll set it equal to table name constant. So we don't need to add any more properties. We simply want to get all of the values from this particular table. And then when it comes to response, we want to go here with 200 JSON stringify. Same deal. Yes, we can send back the object, but I suggest going with this one, result.items, like this. And if we don't have anything for some reason, then we're going to go with empty array. So that should do it for creating the user and also getting all of the users. Still, honestly, the most complex one is going to be for update user. So let's continue. And in this case, I want to go with get user. So we can create the user, we can get all users. And up next, we have get user. In here, the logic is following. We want to go with const result. And that one is equal to await. Then DynamoDB send. And inside of the send, in this case, we want to go with new. Then get command is if we want to get a specific value. And we also want to provide table name, which is equal to our constant. And then the key will be equal to ID. And we'll set it equal to the user ID. Since we're using our ID as a primary key, that's why we need to have this logic. And then in here, let's add one check. If, let's say, the item is not there, so if result that we're getting back, if the item is not present, well, then let's return 404. But again, I'm not going to go too crazy with the error scenarios. This is something we can do pretty much all day long. And I just want to focus first on setting up some logic. So in here, let's go with JSON stringify. And in here, we do want to provide the object with the message property. So this is one of the responses where the syntax is going to be a little bit different. User not found, for example. And in the case of success, we again go with 200 JSON stringify instead of message. Let's go with result.item. So if we pass this condition, we know that the user is there. Then we have delete, since I want to leave the update as the last one. For delete user, the function is going to look like this: await DynamoDB, again, send. And then inside of the send, we want to set up new delete command. And in here, same deal, table name. This should be familiar, and also the key. So ID is equal to user ID. And when it comes to response, I will send back that the user has been created, since in my opinion, it gives a clear understanding whether our functionality works. And the last one is going to be update, which, like I mentioned before, is a bit more complex. And you'll see what I'm talking about in a second. For starters, I want to grab name and email from event. So in here, we are not going to use the faker library. So let's access the name and email. And this one is equal to, by the way, not T at the end. And we're going to go JSON parse. And let's set up event.body. And I'll say that for sure it's going to be present. Again, we're going to construct the result. And result is going to be equal to await.DynamoDB send. And inside of this one, we want to go with update command. So new update command. We'll provide the table name. We'll start with that. So this one will be equal to table name, then key. So we want to update specific item. So ID is equal to the user ID, comma. And then we want to go with update expression attribute names, and also expression attribute values. And I want to say that I want to get back the new values. And I provided extensive description of this particular syntax in the README. So if you're confused about something, please reference the README. So in here, we'll start with update expression. And this one will be equal to following syntax. We'll go with set. And we're updating two things, name and email, correct? And we'll say that hashtag name is equal to colon name, then comma, and we'll go with email is equal to email, like this. Then after update expression, we're going to go with expression attribute name. So now we'll tie it up with our actual request. So expression attribute names. This one will be equal to an object. And in here, we want to access hashtag name. And we'll set it equal to our name. Then comma, copy and paste. And we want to change this thing around. So this one will be email, and we'll set it equal to our email, like this. And then lastly, we want to provide the values. So expression attribute values. Again, this one will be an object. And in here, instead of the hashtag, we want to go with colon name is equal to name, or no, if it's not provided, we'll copy and paste. And we want to set these ones equal to email, or null. And at the very end, we want to go with return values, and we'll say all new. So this is going to return the updated user instead of the old one. And when it comes to return, we're going to go with 200, successful, and stringify result.attributes. Result.attributes like this. It looks like I have a tiny bug over here. Let me fix that. And if everything is correct, we should have our logic in place. So the last thing we want to do in this video is to navigate to the console and just go with npx CDK, or you know what, I can search for the previous command, correct? And if I'm not going to see any errors, I'll see you in the next video where we're going to test our logic in the make requests HTTP file. All right, and once we deploy the stack, and if we don't see any errors, means that we are in good shape and we can start testing our routes initially here in the make request HTTP. So let's navigate and make the first request to get all users. Yes, we haven't created any users yet, but we should get back empty array. And if you have the same result, then of course we can continue. If you have some errors here in the stack, obviously you'll have to troubleshoot. Or if you have some error responses, then I suggest going to the handler, more specifically the log group, and just look for the errors. This is the first place where I always start troubleshooting. If we can get all users, okay, great. Now let's create the user. Like I mentioned, at the moment, we have that faker in our code. So it doesn't really matter what value I provide over here. It's always going to generate something random, like Lucy Reynolds, for example. I also have some email ID. Remember, we use the UUID library for that, and also the created that. And the reason why I prefer library, because basically, and as I said, not why am I clicking on get user, I'm not sure. The reason why I'm getting not found is simply because there is no user with such ID. I pressed the wrong request. Notice the reason why I prefer the faker, because essentially I can just make tons of items by just clicking here, send request, instead of providing each and every time the value. Don't worry, before we switch over to frontend, I will set this back to manual input because I do have the random user generator on the front end as well. And you'll see what I'm talking about. Essentially, once we create a bunch of users, we can send the request. And notice now I'm going to have a list of users in my database. In order to access the single user, what do we need? Well, we need the ID, correct? So I'm just going to pick this one here. Then let's go to get user. Now we want to send the request. Yep, we should get back the same user. And if we want to update, we need to provide two things, the name as well as the email. And here in the request, we need to provide the URL parameter. So now I'm going to be updating this particular user. Let me send it. Now notice I have coding addict and coding addict. And then at the end, if I want to remove the user, or you know what, let me just first showcase. Let me send the request. This is going to be the first response, the coding addict. And now if I grab the same ID, set it over here, delete the user. Yep, user deleted. And if I make the request, we're not going to see the coding addict user. Then let's navigate to AWS. Now we have some items, so we can at least explore. Let's go to tables, then our users table, explore the items, and notice these are the values we have. Obviously, if we want, we can create here manually, but I don't think I'm going to do that. Then, before we switch over to a front end, let's navigate back to handler. And let's switch some things around. So let me close this one here. Let me save it. And now I want to open up the handler. And where we create the user, I'm going to use the name and email. So let me uncomment this. Then comment this one out for your reference. And uncomment this one over here. Same idea. In this case, we're just grabbing name and email. Let me go with npx CDK and then deploy all. I'm going to quickly test that here in the make requests. So while it's deploying, I want to navigate back and basically you can just copy and paste the update one. I'm going to stick to my coding addict. And essentially, I just want to validate this before we switch over to the front end. Let me send the request. Yep. I'm able to create the user with coding addict. Then let me get all of them, and this one should be somewhere here in the bottom. Or at least it should be somewhere here. That's for sure. Not sure. Oh yeah, over here. Sitting right in the middle. Okay, good. And now in order to make things more interesting, let's switch over to the front end. Technically, this is optional, so if you're not interested, you can just move on to the next video. In order to spin up the front end, you'll need a few things, and one of them is going to be this URL. So you'll for sure need to use your URL in order for the front end to work. And obviously, you'll need to have a stack in place. In order to get the front end, you navigate to the course repo. Then more specifically, you're looking for this one. And here you should see this user management app. So there's going to be a users API. This is going to be the backend I'm going to add once I'm done with this project. But the front end is going to be located here, the user management app. I already dragged it to my desktop. So you just want to open this up. And let's go through the README. Basically, in there, I provided all of the info that we'll need. So this is a user management CRUD application. It's built with Next.js, TypeScript, Tailwind CSS, Shatsy, React Query, and obviously AWS, which is going to be our backend. In here, you can read the features that we have in this application. And again, I listed the list of technologies I used in order to build this front-end application. And we can also see the endpoints we're hitting, and this should look familiar since we just set them up in the AWS. This is going to be the project structure. So if you're not familiar with Next.js, this is the approach that they use. So we have a page, we have a layout, and then we have components, and we can add some additional things like hooks and lib and all that. If you have worked with Next.js, obviously this is nothing new to you. And as far as the logic, you can read over here what happens when we click on a certain button. We also have tiny state management, which is built into React Query. And then again, we list the endpoints that we are hitting in this application. And like I said before, in order to spin up this application, you'll need your backend API URL, since the frontend is going to communicate with your backend. And you'll find a place where to set it up in the installation instructions. So clone the repository, basically get the course repository, and then grab this frontend project, then provide the API URL in the lib app.ts. Let me just verify one more time that I have copied. Please don't take the / in this case. Now let's navigate to API.ts, and let's just replace this value. Set this to your API URL. Then we want to install, and we want to run npm run dev. So let's go here with npm install, and then we will go with npm run dev. So this is going to spin up the application on localhost 3000. And check it out. Since I provided the correct URL, I should see all my users over here. And the coding addict is actually going to be the first one, since that's the last user I created. And in order to create a new user, we want to go here to create new user form. And again, if you want to provide your own values, you can definitely do so. I'm just struggling to come up with some, but let me go here with Susan and susan@mail.com. Let's create that user. Yep, we have it over here. Or if you're lazy like me, you can just use this generate random user. And pretty much every time you'll generate random user, you'll get some values, and then you can decide which ones you want to keep, and then you can create new user. And once we have created some users, let's go back to the list, and let's see how we can delete and edit. Let's say I want to edit Susan. I just click on this particular user. So in this case, it's going to be a GET request to get specific info on that user. In this case, it's Susan and susan@mail.com. And let's say that I'm going to change it to John. And the same deal over here. Let's save the changes. And yep. And now we have name John and email john@mail.com. So when it comes to edit user, first we perform a GET request to users/id. That's when we get the info on specific user. And then when we submit this form, when we click on save changes, we actually hit the same route. However, the method is different. The method is put, and now we update the user in the database. And lastly, we can also delete. Since I have so many users, I think right after the coding addict, I'm just gonna start clicking on delete. The idea is the same. We simply hit the route. In this case, we just go with HTTP method delete. And as a result, we're just removing the users. And the last thing that I wanted to showcase is that we can deploy this application and it's still going to work. Now, in my case, I'm going to use Netlify, but obviously, if you're familiar with Next.js, you can use the Vercel as well. In order to do that, first, we'll need to deploy the application. And no, I'm not talking about the backend. So backend is already sitting in the AWS. And unless we destroy the stack, it's pretty much always going to be sitting there. I'm talking about the frontend. And the frontend does not have the Git repo because it's part of the course repository. That's why I moved it out of the course repository. And I suggest if you want to also deploy the application, the first thing you'll need to do is basically remove the existing Git repo. So go with rm, rf, and then Git. Because again, by default, the front-end application is going to be part of the course repository. Once we do that, I'll actually use the Visual Studio Code option, basically deploy right to a GitHub. But since this is somewhat of an advanced course, I'm pretty sure you know how to deploy your application on the GitHub. So I'm going to go here. I'll create a new repo. Then I'm going to commit everything. Let's say initial commit. As I know, I have released a very good Git and GitHub course where I cover all of these things in way greater detail. So if you're interested, definitely suggest enrolling in that course. And then I'm going to publish the branch. I will go with private for now. So I'm going to call this AWS CDK course and then users CRUD app, maybe something like this. And like I said, it's going to be private one. Now we want to navigate to GitHub. Just double check that it's for sure there. And like I said, in my case, I'm going to use the Netlify platform, but feel free to use the platform you use to deploy your front-end applications. At the moment, I'm in my dashboard. I just want to go to add new project, and I'm going to select import an existing project. I'm going to look for GitHub. And I want this one, the AWS CDK course users CRUD app. As far as the project name, as you can see here, the name determines the default URL for your project. So I'll try to use the same one. AWS CDK course users app, for example. And now we just want to go to deploy. Now I'm going to wait for the build to complete. And if everything is correct, you'll see that we'll be able to use our backend, not only from the local instance, but also from the instance that is deployed on Netlify. It looks like my deployment was successful, which is always good news. And since we have everything already deployed on AWS, notice how essentially I'm getting back the same users again. Since everything is stored in the cloud, when the local application fetches for users, it gets back the same response as the one that is deployed on the Netlify. And obviously we can perform rest of the operations here as well. I can generate the new user, and once I create the new user on Netlify, I'm going to have the same deal over here. I'm going to have that same user in my local one as well. And the same is going to be if I, let's say, delete it. Once I navigate here, the user is not going to be present. And let's say if we remove this coding addict, then this one also is not going to be present. And if I change it to, I don't know, coding addict here, since we're storing everything in a cloud, those changes will be visible in both places. Hopefully that is clear. So coding addict and coding addict. And also I forgot to mention that we have this option of export. So you can click on both of these and you'll see that basically we're just downloading this info. So if I go to downloads, I'll have both of them, the JSON one as well as the CSV. And let me just create new folder temp one just to quickly showcase that. I'm going to go here. Let's set it up and let's open this. And this is what we should see. So we have users and also we have the users JSON. That is also an option. Technically, this doesn't have anything to do with AWS, but just wanted to showcase this cool feature. And lastly, I want to go back to something we discussed a little bit earlier, how to restrict access to certain resources. So what am I talking about? Well, I have two applications right now. I have the front-end application on Netlify with this URL. So basically this one is in the cloud. It's publicly accessible. And also I have this local one. And remember when we were setting up the API, so let me navigate back to my stack. Let me close this one over here. When we were setting up the course, we said, okay, allow origins. And we just allowed all of them. But I want to showcase that if I'm going to provide a value over here, I can just restrict access to rest of the application. So only this application that is on Netlify is going to be able to access the API. Now, one gotcha here, remove the /. Otherwise, this is not going to work. And now once we have the URL in place, we want to go with npm, or what am I talking about? npx CDK. And obviously I can get it if I just press on arrow up. I can get one of the previous commands. I'm going to deploy the changes, this URL. And if everything is correct, once I'm going to go back to the browser, only the application that is on Netlify is going to be able to access our backend API. My stack is deployed. So now let's test it out. And if everything is correct, once we navigate to the front end, just make sure that your dev server is running. So if it's not running, navigate to the front end and run the command npm run dev. But if everything is correct, we shouldn't be able to access the users. Basically, we'll see this issue over here, and we can inspect that under the network. Then let's refresh. We'll have the users want to notice we have this course error. So we won't be able to access the application because back in the AWS, we have restricted access. This is it for the project. Hopefully everyone enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.